Today, we're going to read Disney's Peter Pan. Once, there was a house in London where a family named Darling lived. There were Mr. and Miss Darling and their 3 children, Wendy, John, and Michael. It was that home Peter Pan visited one magical evening. On that night, after Michael and John had drawn a pirate map on their father's last clean shirt, Mr. Darling angrily declared, "The children need to grow up." Then, turning to Wendy, he added, "Young lady, this is your last night in the nursery." The Darlings' nursery was a familiar place to Peter. He liked to sit in the shadows and listen to Wendy's stories about Neverland. On his last visit, Peter had been separated from his shadow. Tonight, he and his fairy friend Tinker Bell were there to get it back. But the shadow was in no hurry to be caught. It flitted and skittered around the room. Peter chased after it, making such a racket that Wendy woke up. Wendy was thrilled to see Peter. As she sewed his shadow back on, she explained that it was her last night in the nursery. "But that means no more stories," cried Peter. Peter knew what to do. He invited Wendy to come to Neverland with him. "John! Michael!" Wendy shouted. "Wake up! Peter's taking us to Neverland!" Peter sprinkled some pixie dust on the children, and they began to float right out the window and over the rooftops of London. "There it is, Wendy," Peter said at last. "Neverland." Below, Captain Hook sat on his pirate ship. The captain hated Peter. Hook's hand had been eaten by a crocodile, and he blamed Peter for it. Suddenly the ship's lookout spotted Peter. Hook ordered his men to load the cannon and fire. "Quick, Tink!" Peter shouted as the cannonballs flew by. "Take Wendy and the boys to the island." Tinker Bell zoomed ahead, flying into an opening in a tree where the lost boys and Peter lived. Mischievously, she told the boys that Peter had sent her with a message. There was a terrible Wendy bird headed their way. Peter's order was for them to shoot it down. The lost boys hurried out from their hiding place. They aimed their slingshots at the Wendy bird and fired. Rocks flew everywhere, hitting Wendy and sending her tumbling from the sky. Luckily, Peter Pan arrived just in time to catch her. When Wendy was feeling better, Peter took her to visit the Mermaid Lagoon. Wendy was trying to talk to the mermaids when Peter spotted Hook rowing by in a small boat. Tied up in the back was the Indian princess, Tiger Lily. Hook was holding Tiger Lily prisoner. As Peter and Wendy watched, he tied her to a rock in the sea. Peter got Hook's attention and the two began to battle. Hook forced Peter near the edge of a cliff, but Peter got away and Hook tumbled off the cliff. As he fell towards the water, Hook heard a familiar sound. Tick, tock, tick, tock. It was the crocodile who had eaten his hand, and he was waiting for Hook. While Hook swam away as fast as he could, Peter swooped down to save Tiger Lily. He quickly untied her and flew her home. Back at Peter's hideaway, all was cozy and quiet. Wendy, acting as a good mother should, was tucking the boys into bed. As she did, she sang to them about the wonders of a real mother. By the time Wendy had finished her song, John and Michael were so homesick that they wanted to leave for London at once. Even the Lost Boys wanted to go, but Peter didn't. "Go back and grow up," he said stubbornly. "But I'm warning you, once you're grown up, you can never come back." One by one, the boys left Peter's hideaway until only Wendy was left. At last, she climbed out of the tree too. Outside, she was shocked to see that her brothers and the Lost Boys were tied up. Hook's pirates had captured them. On board his ship, Hook tried to make Wendy and the boys join his crew. "Never," declared Wendy. "Peter Pan will save us." But Hook disagreed. He told Wendy that he had left Peter a package disguised as a present. The gift would get rid of Peter once and for all. Tinker Bell, who had been captured by Hook, heard the pirates' evil plan. Desperate, she escaped from the lantern that held her, and she raced to Peter's hideaway. Peter was just untying the package when Tinker Bell arrived. The fairy flew at the box and pulled it away. "Stop that!" yelled Peter. "What's the matter with you?" Tink knew there was no time to explain. She pushed the box as far away from Peter as she could. The gift began to smoke, and then kaboom! The explosion was so huge it rocked the pirate ship. Hook smiled and turned to the children. Again, he offered them a choice: join his crew or walk the plank. Wendy spoke up bravely. "Captain Hook, we will never join your crew." Hook gave Wendy his most gentlemanly bow and pointed to the plank. "Ladies first, my dear," he said. With tears trickling down her cheeks, Wendy walked the plank. One step, then another, closer and closer to the edge, until finally she jumped. "Cap'n," Shmee, Hook's first mate, said, "there was no splash." "No splash? The ship's bewitched!" Hook's men shouted. But it wasn't a ghost who was haunting Hook. It was Peter Pan, and he was holding Wendy. He had come to save her just as she said he would. "This time you've gone too far," Peter Pan shouted. He placed Wendy in the crow's nest and drew his sword. Peter swooped down, cutting the lost boys free, and then turned to face Hook. "Take that!" Hook cried as he lunged at Peter, forcing him off balance. "I'll run you through!" Peter quickly flew out of Hook's reach, cutting his way, and that with his dagger. Hook took a powerful swing at Peter, but the captain lost his balance. Down, down, down he fell towards the waiting crocodile. The last Peter, Wendy, John, Michael, and the Lost Boys have heard the terrible Captain Hook were his calls for help. "All right, you swabs," Peter Pan called. "We're casting off." But Peter," stammered Wendy, "could you tell me, sir, where are we sailing?" "We are going to London, madam," Peter answered. Tinker Bell flew all around the ship, sprinkling pixie dust as she went. The ship began to glow like gold. Then, slowly, it rose into the air. It was time to take Wendy, John, and Michael home. "Wendy," said Miss Darling. She was gently shaking her daughter, whom she had found asleep by the window. "Oh, Mother, we're back!" Wendy cried as she woke. "Back?" asked Miss Darling. "All except the Lost Boys," explained Wendy. "They weren't quite ready to grow up. It was such a wonderful adventure. Tinker Bell and mermaids and Peter Pan. We sailed away on a ship in the sky." Mr. Darling yawned. "I'm going to bed," he said, not sharing Wendy's excitement at all. But as he turned to leave, Mr. Darling stopped to look at the sky. There, crossing in front of the moon, was a ship made of clouds. "You know, I have the strangest feeling I've seen that ship before, a long time ago when I was very young." And indeed he had.